Welcome to the 7th episode of STOKR Insights with myself, Arnab, and Tobias on the other side. Today we have a very interesting episode. We wanted to do this episode as a special episode because we wanted to discuss on a topic which a lot of people asked us in the past about the history of how the securities market evolved, about how kind of the securities entire arena has changed over the years, and how they see the evolution of the securities market goes into the space. And when we talk about tokenization, how the elements, or I would say the nuances of tokenization and the ethos of tokenization connects with the element of securities or the securities world. And Tobias did quite some research in the last few weeks, I would say, in that regard. And we will do this episode specifically discussing this topic. Tobias, I think we have a great topic at hand today.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm very excited. I think there's a lot of confusion out in the market when people talk about security tokens, tokenized securities, and the like. And we thought that we do a little bit this episode and explain what actually securities are. And for this, we go a little bit back also in history, because it's always useful to understand the current world with knowledge, how it was actually developing over the past. And I have made a little bit of research also about securities, and I found a very interesting angle to it, which started already in Venice. Venice is an Italian town mainly known to tourists, and it's extremely beautiful with all the canals and the palaces, and it has like an extreme richness when you are there, and it's very beautiful. And when you look a little bit in the history, why it was actually created and why it is now also still so extremely beautiful, and it's because it was a trading hub, and it was a major trading hub in the Byzantine times. So they were trading goods with India in the Arabian states, but also in the Mediterranean Sea. So they were buying beautiful silk and very rare spices, and they traded it against like salt, also slaves, weapons, and woods and the like. And this was developing extremely well over centuries. They were dominating actually the trading world, and then established also at the same time a financial center. But they had one specific problem, because as you can imagine, like you have like a lot of goods roaming around on these ships. At that time, you did not have banknotes or the like, so you were trading mainly in silver or gold, like these very heavy precious metals, and these were very dangerous to transport, obviously, and also very costly. So the people started like to think how they can make the trades more efficient, and then at that time they started like to trade with debt securities. And I think that's amazing. This is at least like what we know now. So this was the first time really securities were traded and developed.
I think if I may ask Tobias, and this is kind of the history, because the primary form and the securities, I think one of the main reasons is to also raise capital, right? And history, if I see also earlier days, the kings and kingdoms used to raise the capital to go out for war or to finance their war and those things. And what you're talking about is a trade, and primarily we have entered the 11th century, kind of post 11th century era, where traders try to raise capital. What do you think was the prime motivation behind them for issuing the securities? Because that was the concept initially, was only used by the kingdoms, the kings and state. Do you have any thought on that?
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's very interesting. So the financial world at that time was indeed dominated by the kings and dukes, right? It was a very fragmented world with little kingdoms all over around, and everybody needed financing to build the bridges, beautiful castles, and to, as you mentioned, like to fight, to have battles, and feed the army, right? So. So what happened at that time, this is also like still like in this time was not dominated by private financial investors, right? So So what the merchants did, they gave like these kind of debt to the king or to the duke. Let's call him a Duke Alberto or something like that, you know. And he said, okay, yeah, I will owe you like this kind of amount of gold or silver, and I will pay it back in maybe 2 years time. And the traders and merchants, they were also noblemen at the time, you have to say. And then they were taking like these kind of claims from the kings and the dukes. But how they did it, and this is very important. So the duke actually, he created like a slate, like he was writing like the claim on a slate. So he was issuing like a sort of a stone, right? And I imagine it's beautifully engraved. And there it was written like what kind of claim you had against him. So how much gold and silver he is owning to you. And this kind of slates they could use to trade. So these were like debt securities. So when you encounter like another trader and he had a lot of wood on his boat, you gave in exchange, you gave like this slate to the other trader, and then he could either buy other goods with this, right? Or he could come and see the king or the duke and say, hey, I have a claim against you, and this is my proof that I have this claim against you. And I think this is super important here. What is like the idea of the security is both, right? There's one is this claim, as you say, so sort of like funding need from somebody. And the second one is like the embodiment of it. So they wrote it on a slate to make it actually transferable and liquid as a mean of exchange. And these two elements are crucial to securities in general, to understand what is like the idea behind it.
I think one interesting thing which also kind of resonates to me here, the technology that people use that point of time, right? Because when you're carving on a stone, it's also a tech, right, to a certain extent from that era, if I'm seeing from that perspective. So it's interesting that there are three elements, that there is an intent of issuing some things here from either its kingdom, state, or it's private. Then the technology used to issue those products, and then what are the rights that they're granting. And this is very interesting, you know. Now coming to the maybe if we move to the later part where, let's say, for the trades now started happening, we are entering into the 16th, 17th century. How do you see the evolution now came in at the moment in the market?
Yeah, and I think when you go a little bit further down the history line, then definitely we have to think about Amsterdam. Amsterdam is also, again, a very beautiful trading city, always worth to visit and extremely rich when you look at the buildings. And they created like the first stock exchange as we know it nowadays. And what they did is, because before it was always government debt, which was traded on by securities, they created like the first idea to give out like shares or participation rights of a company, and that was the first stock company probably of the world. It was the East Indian Company, and they were trading and going to the East Indian and trading like spices, silk, I assume, and other goods. And they were also obviously exploiting like the nature there for their profits. And these profits participation you could then acquire actually at the stock exchange in a form of a paper format, right? So this attracted a lot of new investors in the market, because before it was really dominated also by noblemen. And here there were really like merchant traders or normal people from the public who have made some money, and they could participate in this enterprise, in this endeavor. And suddenly they had like the possibility to raise much more capital, obviously. And this eventually made them the most powerful trading nation at that point of time. So it was an extremely powerful instrument. And here again, we have like the share, right? The share is actually the claim against the companies, that it pays like profits out to you. And the second element is here the security element. So you have like the ownership in the form of a paper, right? And you can go to the company and say, okay, I have like actually this claim against you, and please give me like the dividends of your endeavors. So here we have like again these two elements which are crucial to securities.
I think it's also interesting because on this, like what you just mentioned, if you see the growth of the debt, in the debt, the ownership perspective is not there so relevant, right? And investors who is participating in your financial, let's say, progress or financial development technically has some claim but not the ownership element, and the equity the first time gives that element of ownership which was only being enjoyed by the state or the royals or nobles in that sense, right? And this is, I think, brings a very interesting perspective. As you mentioned, another part is we see the evolution from a stone carving to a paper format, right? So the new technology that comes in, it's the paper, and there is now a certificate. Now, I have not seen that era, but I think definitely a lot of people has, and maybe you have heard also in the stories much more. So how was that market operating that point of time? How the securities were being traded? Because I didn't had a Revolut app that time. I didn't had a Robinhood app that time. So how the tradings and those things were happening that era?
Yeah, so basically it was a paper format, right? So you had like a amount of paper certificates, which were I have seen one once where it is like beautifully written what it represents, that you have like this participation in the East Indian company. And then they just like met actually at a trading venue at the first stock exchange, and that was also the time when the first brokers were there and say, okay, we create like a liquid market around these shares, and as it was a very big enterprise, there was a lot of volume also in comparison, probably not to nowadays, but for that time, and then you could actually liquidate your position. And you can also speculate of future profits or future successes of this company, and then the speculation element obviously also came in at that time. So yeah, you had like a price determined by a market of these securities, and this is then very similar actually to how we understand today stock exchanges or securities exchanges.
But I think the challenge also at that point of time, maybe the settlement time took weeks, if not months, right? Because somebody has to go from Amsterdam to London, and physically the paper has to be moved and all these things. Do you have some idea on the how many days it used to take those times?
I personally think that they did not trade so much outside of Amsterdam itself, because it was really like the hub. So I imagine it rather was like more a local venue, and I have no knowledge about how many foreign investors were actually also buying in, and whether they actually could. But it's a good it's a good question. But definitely you had like to move the paper, right? You had to move the paper from one owner to another owner, and that it probably in boats, as it is in Amsterdam, or again with carriages. Yeah.
So technically, you require a lot of trusted parties. You need a carriage owners who is to be trusted, that the guy can actually drive the carriage properly and knows how to manage the horses and knows the streets and everything. So I can imagine like it's not about the risks about the person's knowledge about securities world, but also the knowledge about running the horses properly. So yeah, quite a fun element. So coming back, I think we're very interesting. So now we are in the era of the paper securities, and definitely I think this is a kind of interesting moment. We talk about a lot about the dematerialization, and many people, I think the audience side doesn't know. I think it will be good if you can give a perspective about how the evolution happened and what is exactly a dematerialization means, because I think these two will be connected soon.
Yeah, when we go now fast forward in the history now, when we are like now, the most famous stock exchange is still, I think, the Wall Street, the stock exchange, which is situated in south of Manhattan. And here I think there was also like a trading hub again, right? And a lot of wealth was created there. And then they created like a lot of companies, like from railway companies to oil exploiting companies and the like. And they still had like these kind of papers, right? So I read once a story that in the evening when they were trading like these stocks, they were carrying, like putting also like again like the paper certificates on a carriage and transporting it from one broker to the other, right? To do the settlement as you have said it, but it was also like here again very locally, right? So, but it still had like to move somehow. And then people probably found it very impractical at one point of time. So the idea came up that you have a Central Securities Depository, somebody who is actually holding like these paper certificates, and in return he is a trusted entity, and he keeps like book entry rights for the brokers and for the indirectly probably for the investors. So here it's a clear shift. That's what you call a dematerialization, and I think it's definitely a dematerialization, because suddenly, okay, the paper was in the seller, but actually these rights you had like to trust the intermediary. Like, this was the rise of financial intermediaries. Suddenly, you did not trust like this representation as it was a slate, right, in Venetian times, or the paper, the share in the times of the East Indian Company. Now you had like to trust a bank or a broker or somebody who is keeping like your records.
I think it was precisely 1970s, right, as we are talking, right? Because that's when the idea of dematerialization came in, that you have to rely on a trusted. And this is very interesting, because when you talk about trusted and we're talking about Bitcoin and tokenization, we try to use the word trustless, which maybe will come down later during the discussion. But what is interesting also for the audience to be highlighted here, like which I wanted to share, is 1970s was a very pivotal moment, because 1971 NASDAQ came in, as Tobias mentioned, and that became an electronic securities exchange. And then we are kind of entering the era of electronics, and electronic exchange can only operate if the securities are also in electronic format, and somebody has to hold those documents to kind of technically think of as a wrapper. As of today in Bitcoin or crypto world, you call it wrapping, like wrapping a Bitcoin into Ethereum with ERC20, in that way wrapping X instrument into X platform. Somebody was at that point of time was dematerialization is, for me, technically is wrapping, Tobias, right? If somebody was creating a wrapper and saying, hey, I have the securities, now this is my book entry, follow the book entry. And that's where the NASDAQ post dematerialization world came in. Initially, it was physical certificates being stored on the CSDs or clearing houses in Europe, reference maybe Clearstream in that sense. Mm-hmm. These are the CSDs, which were kind of the trusted party that was given the trust of the investors on the issuers to hold that, and some settlement is happening based on their participation and their transfer agents, and all the participants were coming in. So it's interesting, I think, Tobias, as you're mentioning, if we see a technology evolution from stone to paper, now we are going to the electronics era, the era of fax, telephones, and all these things. And so like, how this book entry operates, Tobias, if you can be, because I think you have also done quite some research on this point, how this book entry process really works, and what are the kind of limitations, if you can share right now in the market at the moment we are seeing?
Yeah, I think like one very important, as we have like this historical context, very important highlight I really want to make, because like this actually this book entry rights, what went totally away is like this kind of abstract thinking what the Venetians developed when they said, okay, I have like this kind of slate, and this is my right. The abstraction goes now, okay, I'm in the trust of the company. So in the beginning, I assume in the electronic times, you had like sort of software systems which were made for each broker, right, and for each participants, and then they had like to somehow communicate with another device. So this is like the era, as you say, the electronics is like the era of devices. So you have like in your device basically stored actually the amounts of shares, and then they have like to talk to another device, another computer of another broker, and then they have like to see whether whether this is like matching, and they have to constantly reconcile all the different devices in the end in the market. And this is like how it also still now works. And I think it was funny because you said it was you said at that time it was, but this is still indeed the case. I think this is like how a securities market is still working. Some even have still like a paper certificate in the basement. But the essential part is really like this book entry reconciliation. It's a monster work, and that's why you have like so many different intermediaries and trusted parties. And you really have like to make sure that everybody has actually the same information. And this is still like a logistical nightmare in nowadays world, right? And that's why you have still a lot of frauds, inconsistencies, tax avoidance possibilities, and the like.
Because I think the challenge which we are like, as you mentioned, Tobias, also here is as the volume is increasing compared to the Venetian eras and today's volume, there is a huge difference, right? And as the volume is increasing, you are still keeping the same intermediaries and middleman and same processes. I think we are not reducing the complexities, right? Technically, the complexity is increasing, and that means the chances of error is also increasing, maybe not directly proportional, but maybe in exponential manner in that way, right? And this is the challenge, because if it, like for me, like we are not in the era of pager or fax machine at the moment, though certain players or certain regulators may be using it still in those days because of certain obligations, regulatory wise or legislative wise. But we move to a digital era much more, right? We rely on a cloud solutions, we rely on like your Apple phone or any mobile cell phone is kind of a supercomputer you're holding at the moment, which is much more faster and sophisticated than just telephone, where you can just do like remember like the telephone. I still remember like when I was a kid, when the telephone came, it has only one purpose: to receive and call and to do the call. But now mobile is not for that purpose, right? We move to a complete different, from listening to music to holding to NFTs to to talking over WhatsApp or just chatting or maybe checking social medias, right? Now, the question is that element of digital advancement that we got today, and there's a reason when you corrected me that I am talking about past, but in the kind of securities world is still in the electronics world. Do you see that it's a wiser choice to right now to stay in that era of electronics securities world, or do you think the time has already come for the new era to find a new way of how settlement and how tokenize securitize settlement or securities issuance works? What, like, your personal opinion on this point, Tobias?
Yeah, but I think my personal opinion, as we are both working for a tokenization company and believing, I think, in what we are doing. But definitely, I see now with blockchain, we have like now again the possibility to use like really like the original sense of securities, how they were created in the Venetian times, with this kind of trusted representation of your claim against someone or some company, right? And this happens when you have like the digital entry now on the blockchain, and you as an investor, you only need to manage actually your wallet, and then you have not an intermediary in this sense in between anymore. You have like really like the issuer, like, so think of the Duke Alberto, right? And the investor. And yeah, and I think what we see a little bit in general, people talk about blockchain. We see it also in Germany. Germany, for example, they created a new law trying like to sort of digitalized, but in the end they called it also EPG, which E stands for electronics. And I think you would say this is still stemming from an electronic kind of mindset, because here we have again, I think, like dematerialized securities rather than securities which represent like a direct claim against the issuer. But here we have again somebody who has to hold this kind of accounts and the book entry rights, in this sense. And this is like the idea is a little bit like the same as we have described, I think, before, how like securities markets just work nowadays, but it's not reflecting actually the potential you have now with blockchain, where you can say, okay, we have this kind of token, and this token is the representation of the ownership of the claim against the issuer without the trusted intermediary.
You did ask me the question, but I will still answer, one point Tobias here, because I think for me, I like, you come from the, I would say, the TradeFi securities world and the legal kind of things, and also trying to connect with the crypto side and the blockchain side. And primarily, I try to see also from the principle of Bitcoin ethos here, which is becoming, I think more and more, we are trying to appreciate more of the Bitcoin white paper. And the element that we need to reduce the trust and trustlessness. This is, I think, the state of, I would say, economy, which we are looking for, right? We created so many trusted middlemen that at the end of the day, we are at the mercy always of the third parties. Technically, that creates a huge point of failure. We are at the, I would say, society-wise, we are in that moment where we need to really rethink the current infrastructure and see, hey, certain things doesn't need a trusted entity, rather a trustless infrastructure, where you don't need to trust a third party, but collective consciousness, a collective infrastructure participation, create the element trustless that you can rely upon. And there comes the DLT or the blockchain or the record keeping, right? The blockchain, from my personal perspective, is blockchain is the CSD technically, right? What is the role of a CSD, or kind of this clearance houses or this depository houses technically is to do record keeping, right? And the DLT or distributed ledger technology or blockchain, however you call it, one of the key elements for them is to not to do crazy AI stuff or crazy, automation tool. One and only things that they can do very nicely is to keep a record in a trustless manner that you can rely upon. And this is where I think we need to, and this is what I personally feel, we are entering into the era of evolutionary phase where dematerialization may evolve to something else. So rather thinking this evolution in the perspective of dematerialization by keeping those same people, effectively what we will do is you will bring those horsemen who was bringing the horses from one place to another back to the digital era. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't help then, because you're trying to bring those service providers from the kind of the old infrastructure and trying to fit them here, that may actually demean or make the current technological evolution useless to a certain extent. And this, I think, what we need to really discuss about, where tokenization makes sense and how the evolution should look like, not how the evolution can fit into the current infrastructure. And this is, I think, some of the discussions I would like to do, and maybe we would like to do in the next episodes in that sense.
Yes, I think, we should look then in the next episodes, like really concretely what tokenization means. Because now we have just touched upon it, but I think to wrap it up, I think again I would highlight, like, this is when you would learn something out of our episode. I think it's these two elements which securities have and can have now also in the future. One is that basically you have actually a claim of profits, revenues, or other debt instruments against a company or a venture. And the second is that you have like a sort of like an embodiment, really like a security. You own actually this kind of claim. And this, where I see the evolution is, this will be tokenization in the purest form. Purist.
Perfect. Thanks, Tobias. Thanks for sharing the insights and also explaining a lot of details. And I think for the audience also, you had a little bit better understanding on the evolutionary phase. If you have any suggestions, any feedback, or anything that you have experienced also during this transitionary period, please let us know in the comment section. We'd like to discuss maybe in the next episodes on that. Thank you very much for joining our session. If you like what we're discussing, please feel free to subscribe and also share with your audience. We are always looking for your feedback, and see you next week.
See you. Yes, sir.